I guarantee that genetically there are certain dogs that produce higher levels of dopamine. There are dogs that genetically are going to externalize when they're excited more. They're going to shake and vibrate and vocalize and things like that. And there are dogs that are better at internally at switching gears between high arousal and lower arousal activities. And so all those things are affected by genetics.
Right.
You know.
So let me ask you this now. Knowing that, would you pick a dog? Like, how would you pick a dog now compared to, say, before, knowing that, this happens? That's
a really good question. So for me, what I look for a lot these days in my personal dogs is what I call an internal dog, right? And these dogs can be sometimes difficult to make like modern IGP obedience. Right. People want really super flashy obedience with the dog prancing in the heeling and like tails up and wagging, like a lot of external energy. I like a more kind of border collie-esque energy, if you will, right? A dog who holds himself really well.
Right.
Like can contain himself, but then when it's time to go, explodes. They don't lose any energy. This is what I call the classic internal dog.
This that go and get it with no hesitation. This that never quit. Start that elevation. This that process. This that in the making.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Elevated Canine Podcast. I am here with my boy
Roel Guerra.
And today we have, what is it? The GOAT? We got the GOAT. We got the GOAT in here.
Everybody's.
I think if you are into dog sport, dog training, you know who this man is. Michael Ellis. What's up, Michael? How's it going, man?
Oh, thank you, man. That's very kind of you.
Yeah.
Going great. I'm really happy to be here.
You good? Man, we're excited for this weekend. We're going to have a seminar here with Michael, and I never have the time to get out because, with the kids and everything, and I was like, man, I'm happy to finally I told my wife 3 days I'm going to be there taking notes. Oh, that's it. So
that's wonderful. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for having me down.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you coming out, man. I think that, I always mention, how I feel like I came in at a certain time into dog training when I was lucky enough to already have you there putting out content and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Like, the marker training, all that stuff, like at least for me, you were like the first, person that I started watching and learning from. And what's crazy is like even, and I also learned like from Forrest later on and watching you down there right now, working your dog, I was like, I could see it, and I hope that maybe when you watch me work my dog, you could see some of your, of your style of training and what I do. And that's where it came from, man. Honestly,
that would be amazingly humbling. That's what you always hope.
Yeah, man. I'm super pumped, man. I know I'm fanboying right now, guys. But anyways, here we go. Let's start from I personally kind of right now we're talking about like the whole LA scene and everything. I do like to kind of hear about like the history. Mm-hmm. So yeah, man, talk to us a little bit about kind of where it started.
Well, where I can talk about kind of how I came into it.
Let's do it.
And that. And so. As a teenager, I got a German Shepherd and got into AKC obedience and actually conformation dog shows. And I was in high school and saw a Schutzhund and police dog demo at a dog show in Ohio. And I had conformation line American show line German Shepherds, and I saw that and I'm like, oh, I'm going to do that. So I came back home, found a club. There was a Schutzhund club in San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah. So I grew up in San Diego. So San Diego Schutzhund Club shared the field with the San Diego PD down at Home and Federal down in San Diego. And then there was a Schutzhund Club, Mitzi Robinson's Schutzhund Club up in Ramona. And so I went out. None of the dogs that I had were remotely capable of doing Schutzhund. So I started doing helper work and got in. And at that time, Al Benuelos was coming up and getting really active. So he would come out to our club. The club I started in was primarily a Rottweiler club.
That was like the breed that everybody kind of had at that time.
That was at the height of that. Tony Beecher and the German-style Rottweiler scene was landing here in the U.S., and they were doing German-style shows. They were importing lots of really nasty Rottweilers.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Super aggressive dog. They're not like the Rottweilers now. Like, they've definitely toned them down. They were a lot of social aggression, and but the Rottweiler blew up at that point in time. But anyway, so that Schutzen scene. So back and forth between L.A. up to Leo Mueller's place out in Fontana and Jean-Claude Ballou. And
Yeah.
That whole scene.
It's crazy because I've heard all those names, but like it was kind of like they were already kind of like getting out the scene a little bit.
The first Schutzen Club I went to was like 1987, right? 88, and then
I was a year old.
I was born in 87.
right in the early 90s was when I was really getting active, and that whole Southern California. We were just talking a second ago that Omar Mueller was doing Schutzen down at Leo's Club at the same time, and he had a little tiny Malinois that he was training
Before the Bulldog.
Before the Bulldog,
Got it.
Yeah, so
Then that was like Malinois were kind of like not really seen back then.
No, I had no idea. That's where I came into the Malinois was actually Mitzi Robinson, who had a really nice. She finished 5th at the IFR, the Rottweiler Worlds. She had a really nice Rottweiler, but she imported from Germany a little Malinois.
Got it.
Peter Engels of von Lohenfels Kennels, and she imported this little tiny dog. But he was super cool. Like none of us had seen anything like that. And then you guys, Gary DeHue?
I know the name.
Yeah, Gary DeHue was a really good helper, a decoy that came up in the same club I came up at the same time.
Got it.
And his mom was Belgian, and his dad had been an American serviceman. So he lived in Belgium till he was 10 or 12, and then he moved to LA with his dad because they split. And so he had a Rottweiler too. He didn't know anything about Malinois, but he went back on a family visit to Belgium, probably in like 1990, I'd say, and came back with VHS tapes of Belgian Ring and Malinois, and he went straight back and bought a couple dogs and brought them back, and we started playing around with Malinois, and that was the end of it for me. Like as soon as I encountered my first Malinois, I'm like,
that was it.
This is the dog for me for sure.
Was anyone using Malinois for Schutzen at that time, or was it just German Shepherds and Rottweilers?
Yeah, just German Shepherds, Rottweilers, Dobermans, the bull breeds like the bulldogs and stuff. Yeah,
but you had a pit bull though, right?
I had a pit bull.
Okay.
Yeah, the first dog I started was a pit bull. That's how I know Larry really.
Yeah.
Like when Larry was when she was training Rosie, her Schutzen 3 bitch back then, I had a red-nosed female.
Got it.
Named Juliet.
Got it.
Yeah, at the same time.
And so what was it about the Malinois that you were like, this is for me?
I didn't realize you could have a dog with that much drive, that much desire to bite, that much aggression, and that much handler orientation. I think people misunderstand Malinois a lot. They're sensitive to their handler, and they're socially sensitive, and they're really touchy-feely with you. And so I was totally surprised by that. And I never really liked the heavy-handed aspects of sport work, of dog training.
Yep.
And a lot of the working line German Shepherds, if you got a good one, they were so insensitive, and people put so much pressure on them to get them to do stuff. And the Malinois, here I had these dogs that were really sensitive to the handler, but not sensitive to the decoy at all. Like the bite work, zero sensitivity, but really responsive to you, and allowed me to kind of train the way that I wanted to train at the time when we were just really starting to experiment in a big way with reward-based training in a detailed way.
So like from the beginning, you saw something that you didn't like, wasn't appealing to you, like the way that training was back then. I mean, it was very normal.
Yeah, it was totally normal. It never felt good. You know what I mean? There's this. I came up in AKC obedience at the time, and it was old school Keeler method stuff, straight up 6-foot leash and a choke chain. And if you did all that training well, and you had a good dog, you had a dog that was trained. And so there was, at the end of that, there was something satisfying about getting through the process, but the day-to-day training wasn't fun.
Right.
Like you all get out there, you're being hard on the dog constantly. It all feels like a battle. It feels like none of that stuff, even if you did it well, was enjoyable to do.
Right.
It felt like it was necessary. And once you started to realize that, hey, maybe it's not necessary, maybe there's another way to do this, then that was incredibly liberating and exciting.
Got it.
Would you consider yourself one of the pioneers in getting away from heavy-handed training?
I think I was at the time I was transferring that information to the protection sport world.
Okay.
So I think there were people that were much larger pioneers in the world of obedience and agility in those places. There were people, they took it and ran with it. Right. It was sort of slow to make its way into the world of protection sports.
Right.
I would say the protection sport world was 5 to 10 years behind kind of the agility and obedience people in terms of their buying into more reward-based methods.
Did you learn that style of training because you were in the AKC obedience? Because you did say that when you did get into the AKC obedience, it was still 6 foot leash and a choke chain.
Yeah, at the time that I was doing it, I was a teenager, so that was the only thing that was really available.
Right. So where did you find the information as far as reward-based training?
So a lot of experimentation. So and I wish I knew her name, but one of the Schutzen Club that I belonged to in San Diego shared a field also with Hidden Valley Obedience Club, which was an obedience club there. And one day they trained before us, and I was early for training, and there was a woman out there with a border collie, and she was doing obedience, and I just sat down and watched her, and I'm like, my dog doesn't look like that. What the heck is she doing? And I started to pay attention to it. So I'd come out early for a little bit and watch her train, which gave me some ideas to start experimenting. And so with my own dogs, I played ball and stuff with the dogs, and I just started messing with it wasn't with food to start with. It was all with a toy. I'd take a ball, tennis ball, and hold it in front of the dog and lure it into sits and started to goof around with it. And then in the early, probably 1989, I met Ivan Balabanov, and he and I trained together. I picked up a lot of interesting stuff from Ivan. Anybody that
you guys were both like just seeking just knowledge or how to figure out how to do things a different way.
Absolutely. And there was no guidance at all really in the protection sport world. And it was just at the point where people were starting to use toys a lot in the obedience for protection sports. But it was more like what I call the toy as an apology. You would use the toy to get the dog up and drive, and then you'd crank on the dog a whole bunch with a prong collar.
I would say a lot of trainers still do that.
Yes, they do. You're not wrong. And at the end of it, you'd give them the toy, right?
Just to get the emotion.
Yeah. And there's
that's interesting.
And the dogs kind of learn to endure all that stuff. But the idea that the dog was actively working to produce the reward, that came kind of slowly into that world. And so it was just experimenting with.
No, I mean, to this day, it's like you see the trainers that grasp that piece right there is like the most, the hopefulness, the creating hopefulness that something's going to happen versus like, I'm going to try to create drive and hopefully it lasts
exactly
for this run that I'm about to do.
And drive to basically allow me to use a bunch of pressure and so that the dog will persist through it.
Right.
So if I get you high enough in drive, then yes, I can do these things to you and you'll tolerate it. And I can make you correct. And then I use the toy at the end to sort of satisfy that. But that idea that the dog was in control of it, that they were making things happen, that was kind of a big deal at the time.
So going off of that, so when I remember like Guapo, he's really the dog that, I've learned the most with and everything. And, I was doing a lot of like yeses and a lot of like building up and everything. So when you started, figuring that piece out, did you run into those issues of like, oh, now I got to figure out like how to, cap, how they say, cap or, work on, teaching the dog how to, how to regulate, or whatever.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like I was very unfair to my dog for doing things that he couldn't control.
Yeah.
And I would like to speak a little bit on that because I feel like a lot of people out there are going through the same thing. They think, oh, the dog's just blowing me off. He's giving me the finger. He's doing all this stuff. When in reality, he cannot control himself. You know what I'm saying?
You're 100% right. So I would say that it's been totally an ongoing process for me, and it's still ongoing. Like this balance of energetics, like getting a dog motivated so they want to do the work, enough motivation for the task, but their ability to self-regulate, to turn it off and on, when to hold themselves. And I talk about it all the time these days because I've become obsessed in the last few years with classical or Pavlovian conditioning, right? I'm going to talk a bunch about it this weekend, right?
Right.
And part of it is this, that's Pavlovian conditioning is the part that we dismissed. Most dog trainers dismiss is the simple one, right? We use it to create our markers, Pavlov, tone food, the dog salivate, the whole 9 yards, right? And then people go, that's the simple one, and they kind of dismiss it, and they focus on operant conditioning, on the, cause and effect, the choices that dogs make.
Right.
But I've come to believe that Pavlovian conditioning drives everything, and it's the more powerful of the two. Like if you are pitting Pavlovian conditioning against operant conditioning, and they're in conflict with each other, Pavlovian conditioning will win every time. And a lot of what we've done when we started to learn to manipulate motivation in dogs is we classically conditioned, or through Pavlovian conditioning, caught them in really high states of arousal. And that high state of arousal was conditioned to location, to exercise, to me, to all kinds of different things.
Yep.
And that arousal that the dog had is involuntary. It's not a choice on their part, right?
They just do
it's
it.
conditioned.
Yeah.
And so now this dog can't sit. You ask it to sit and its butt's hovering 2 inches off the ground, right? Because you've said sit, and tossed a toy for it. Sit, tossed a toy for it. Sit, tossed a toy for it. You say sit. This dog's like this. All his muscles are tense. He can't sit. And we're correcting him to get him to sit. Like, hey, he's not sitting. He's not putting his butt on the ground. That's a classic example of what we're calling now like Pavlovian interference, right? Where that's a situation we've created through drive manipulation, and we're holding the dog accountable for something they can't control.
Right.
And we all went through that phase.
Yeah.
Like you're
I'm putting I put e-collar on the tail, like getting so like you breed, right? And so do you think that how much is there a genetic component to that like they become more
100%
that way? Okay.
Yeah. I think, and I don't know that there's been good controlled scientific studies out, but I guarantee that genetically there are certain dogs that produce higher levels of dopamine. There are dogs that genetically are going to externalize when they're excited more. They're going to shake and vibrate and vocalize and things like that. And there are dogs that are better internally at switching gears between high arousal and lower arousal activities. And so all those things are affected by genetics.
Right.
You know.
So let me ask you this now. Knowing that, would you pick a dog? Like, how would you pick a dog now compared to say before, knowing that, this happens?
That's a really good question. So for me, what I look for a lot these days in my personal dogs is what I call an internal dog, right? And these dogs can be sometimes difficult to make like modern IGP obedience.
Right.
People want really super flashy obedience with the dog prancing in the heeling and like tails up and wagging, like a lot of external energy. I like a more kind of border collie-esque energy, if you will, right? A dog who holds himself really well.
Right.
Like can contain himself, but then when it's time to go, explodes. They don't lose any energy. This is what I call the classic internal dog.
Right.
And so I like that kind of dog myself, right? And so I try to select that type of dog, but you can't tell when.
Yeah. What do you look at? I feel like I got Galan now, but then I feel like I'm at that place where I could either go to the point where he's like starts making these bird sounds that Guapo was making, like, or I could just tone it down a little bit. And so how would you? I guess like for everybody out there watching, what do you recommend to create a dog that could manage his emotions?
So I think some of it is created and some of it you can't. There's nothing you can do about it. Right? There's going to be a certain dog that when they get stimulated enough, and the kind of work we do, they're going to at some point, whether it's in bite work or we need to crank them up some in the obedience because the exercises are getting harder. We want to do sendaways, like long sendaways. Or, we need motivation. You had to have to pump the dog up. And one dog it's going to be hard for. If I identify a dog that when he's young, seems to have problems, there's a couple of things, and we'll talk about them a bunch this weekend. One is I get them on intermittent reinforcement sooner. Like I used to keep dogs on continuous reinforcement longer than I do now. And what I found is if you're on continuous reinforcement too long, when you go off, for the dogs that get aroused, they get really frustrated and you get a lot of externalization from them. Can
you break that down a little bit more to the people that don't really have the lingo down? Yeah.
So when we're teaching a new dog a behavior, we are on what we call continuous reinforcement. That means every repetition of the new behavior is rewarded, right? You're trying to get the dog to understand.
You're paying them for everything.
I'm teaching you how to sit.
You pay them every time.
Every sit's rewarded for a certain period of time, right? Because you want them to understand. They have no idea what this is, right? They need to learn the action and they need to learn what the word means. And so they're on a very high rate of reinforcement or continuous reinforcement. there's a point at which you obviously aren't going to reward every repetition of every behavior you're teaching. And that's going to what we call a variable or intermittent reinforcement schedule, right? And a reinforcement schedule just means how often are you rewarding a given behavior. And in the early days, and up until the last 10 years for me probably, we kept the dogs on continuous reinforcement for quite a long time, making sure the behaviors were really solid and exactly the way we wanted them before we put them on a variable or an intermittent schedule.
Right.
Right. The problem with that is that when you go to a variable schedule, you've created such a strong expectation of reward that it's very disappointing for the dog. And with a low motivation dog, they have a tendency to drop off quickly. Yeah. With a high motivation dog, they get really frustrated, right? Which is part of what drives intermittent reinforcement to work, right? Your dog goes, oh, I didn't get it. Next time I'm going to get it. Oh, I didn't get it. Next time I'm going to get it, right? Well, if the frustration spike is kind of too high, and I'm using frustration as a colloquial term, frustration level's too high, then the dog starts to bubble over.
Right.
And it's not necessarily a choice on their part. I have a dog that happens to vocalize a little bit when he gets really stimulated, right? And I can manage that vocalization by keeping him from getting too stimulated. Well, if I've kept him on continuous reinforcement too long and I come off, he gets really stimulated and there's nothing much I can do about it. Like he's going to get jacked up. And so then some stuff that I don't want may come along for the ride, right? He starts bouncing in the healing and I'm trying to stop that, but it's really hard for him to stop because all this energy is bubbling out of him. And some dogs handle that better than others, right?
Yep. Okay.
Would you consider that arousal? Just too much arousal?
Yeah.
Because of the continuous reinforcement?
Because of the frustration of going off of continuous reinforcement.
Now, let me ask you this. So say you are paying this dog a lot, right? You continue, reinforcement. In the way that you deliver this reward, do you think that matters?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. So, because I feel like, say, even if I am going to use a yes, I could use it with even a different tone. I feel like it could kind of have a difference sometimes, or if you're going to pay with food or.
Yeah. Like we're doing all kinds of things to manipulate it now, like switching values of rewards, using certain types of rewards where you don't want too much arousal and other types and others. Whether or not you release the dog from the behavior, how much time elapses before you produce a reward is helpful too, like to prevent the dogs from getting like overly stimulated. Like you release the dog and you wait 3 seconds and then you produce a reward in kind of a low key way. There's lots of ways we're manipulating that now, where we are kind of controlling the arousal level as we go. But a big piece of that is I introduce intermittent reinforcement early, even with puppies. I lure you into a sit, I reward you. I lure you into a sit, I reward you. I lure you into a sit, I don't reward you. I let you out of the sit, and then I do the next one. I reward you. So I've introduced this idea. I'm not going to build this idea that every single time you're going to get rewarded.
Right.
It's ultimately it's the same process that drives free shaping, actually, right? If your listeners are familiar with free shaping, right? You are building a behavior and you're rewarding steps on the way to a finished behavior, but you don't get the finished behavior in the beginning, right? So I'm trying to free shape the dog into touching my hand with his nose, right? So I stick my hand out and he looks at my hand and I mark and reward him, etc. Well, what you do is you reward him looking at your hand, you reward him looking at your hand, you reward him looking at your hand, and then he looks at your hand, you don't reward him, right?
Right.
So what's that create? With the right kind of dog, it creates a little bit of frustration. He goes like, hey, I thought I was getting rewarded for this. So the next time he does it a little more energetically. Right. And you reward that and you shape that. And so there's a little bit of frustration that comes when you violate a dog's expectations of reward, right? And with the right kind of dog, it adds energy and it drives them forward. So that's a good thing for creating behavior. If I have built too much of an expectation of reward, then the arousal that comes from the disappointment of not being rewarded sends them off a cliff now. And so then you have a harder time. And there's also all kinds of research that if I were on continuous reinforcement for 2 years and then I try to reduce the rate, my dog doesn't perform as well. One of the things that about intermittent reinforcement or variable reinforcement is it makes behaviors more persistent as well. That means when the dog doesn't get rewarded, they don't quit on you. They're like, oh no, next one. next one. For sure, it's going to be the next one. And you get a behavior that's what we call very resistant to extinction, right?
And I assume at the point where you come off of continuous reinforcement to intermittent depends completely on the dog.
Correct.
Okay.
I want to like I say I'm doing it early now,
Right.
and just because I've shown the idea to the dog doesn't mean they're not still getting a lot of rewards. But if I had a really motivated young dog and the dogs, all their energy in the work was really good, their focus and concentration and engagement was super good, and they learn really quickly, then I'll introduce more of that sooner. If the dog is, if you're struggling to hold the dog's attention and the dog's kind of going through the motions and not putting good, then don't come off of continuous reinforcement yet. That's not, the dog's not ready for that yet.
Right.
You need them committed more to the activity.
Do you think there's a place for like no reward, like literally just make them do something and not pay them for it?
Oh, I absolutely. Yeah. It's essential, especially for a competition dog.
Okay.
Like in companion dog stuff, you can always give the dog some feedback, right? Somebody could always go, "Oh, what a good boy," or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, but that's really what I want from a finished competition dog, right?
Yeah.
There's going to come a point where he has to do things and get zero feedback from me.
Yeah.
And if I've rewarded him every time, or even if I've given him feedback every time, even if I haven't given him a primary reward, food or a toy,
Yeah.
I've said, "Good job, buddy," or something like that. Then later, when I don't in a trial and I'm not giving him any information, then he thinks he's wrong, right? So it's really important that my reps, the reps in which he's not going to get rewarded, look exactly like the reps in which he's going to get rewarded.
Right.
And that he's performed behaviors with zero feedback from me at some point, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what allows that dog to go like, okay, I don't need feedback from you every time. Right?
Yeah. I worked with a trainer last year, and he's a very high level, IGP guy, and a lot of his theory around training was like, no, like I make the dog do it, and then like I'll produce the reward after I pet him, after I make him come up here and give me some, like, give me kisses, then maybe I give him the ball or one hot dog, like very little reward. Like,
so he was using pressure, negative reinforcement to create, to make the behavior.
Yep. Yeah. But he spent a lot of time with the dog, like on a back tie building drive separately, but then to do the behavior, he wouldn't, like, he's not going to be using the ball and all that stuff. Like, he did not preach that. Now, to me, it was like, well, I don't know if that's my style of training, but but like when you see his dogs, they're very, like, it's almost like he preached like the dog's got to do it because you told him to, but eventually he's going to get paid for it.
Yeah. I think if you're a skilled technician and you have the right dog, you probably get away with that.
Yeah.
Right. But I think for a lot of, unless you're very, very skilled at the negative reinforcement work, compelling the dog to do the behaviors,
right?
Or you have a sensitive dog or a dog without so much motivation. We happen to be a German Shepherd guy by any chance?
Yeah.
So that some of the working German Shepherds are like a different animal. Right?
Yeah.
Like you can do all that. They're really solid. They got nerves of steel. They're really freaking insensitive, and you can make a ton of drive. And I know good German Shepherd trainers that do that. They make a bunch of drives separately.
Yeah.
They basically use negative reinforcement or pressure to teach the behaviors, and then the reward comes after.
And it's worth it to the dog. Like,
it's worth the
I'll
dog
take
still
all
take
that.
it.
Yeah.
They take it all, and they don't look all beat up, and they're willing to do it. But it's a very specific kind of dog.
Yeah.
Right. And then again, you get into the part of it for me, which is I have a kind of underlying philosophy that I'm going to teach a dog the way I would want it to be taught.
Right.
Right. And so for me, the reward-based end of it is, one, I want to effectively communicate and create a certain attitude about training with this dog. I want my dog to like training with me and working with me, right? So the reward-based stuff satisfies that, like you get that. But also, it's my opportunity in a sort of stress-free way to explain to the dog what I expect them to do, right? And there's a huge difference between learning a new behavior under pressure or stress, or having stress, pressure, or stress layered over a behavior you already understand. And so I am not a fan, unless it's necessary, of teaching with pressure.
Got it.
Right? I don't want my dog to learn the behaviors that way because he has to figure out what I'm trying to teach him, and I have to apply some small amounts of stress because that's the only thing that's reinforcing the making the behavior happen at that point. If I'm not using lures or toys or food to teach him the behaviors, then I'm using the leash and that kind of thing. And so he's trying to figure out what it is I want him to do while he's under stress, right? I'll wind up talking about it this weekend as well, but there's a bunch of classic psychological studies around this, right? One's called perceived control of aversive experiences, right? And that's
too much for me.
Yeah. So all it is basically they took a bunch of psychology grad students and hooked them up to things where they could shock them, right? And if you thought the shock was under your control, or it was under your control, meaning you could choose to answer a question incorrectly, or you could press the button and shock yourself, the same physical input would cause less stress. They'd measure their heart rate and cortisol, as opposed to if you thought it was out of your control, you didn't know what was happening. So you give me the remote and you don't know when you're going to get shocked or what for, the same exact physical input will cause your stress levels to go through the roof.
Right.
That same physical input, when you understand and it's under your control, which is what we're trying to do with dog training. Anytime we're using aversives, I want them to be under the dog's control.
Right.
I want the dog to recognize like, hey, I know what I need to do to make this not happen, right? And so that way, the dog's under significantly less stress because I've shown him what to do. Now he knows about stress. And then at that point, when I apply pressure, he already not only does he have a foundation on that behavior, but the pressure that I apply causes less stress for the dog, right?
Got it.
And so I try to the best of my ability to avoid teaching with pressure. You know, there are all kinds of emergency things that happen where you're like, I just got to make this dog stop this or whatever it is.
Yep.
But in general, all the behaviors we're creating. And so even though somebody might be good at that work or effective, but it's philosophically, I choose not to do that.
And you're talking when we say pressure though, like even like leash, like guiding with the leash, even like you'd rather stay away from it.
It depends on how the dog's taking it. So like if I have a dog, certainly if I've taught leash yielding work properly, right? So we have a whole mechanical system for breaking down leash yielding. That's done. The dog goes through some small stress while they learn about moving with the leash, but I'm not really trying to teach them to sit her down or anything at that point. Once they understand the leash, you get certain dogs that are really light on the leash. Mm-hmm. So I will incorporate the leash to help.
Got it.
I pull up a little to help you sit, or you're not folding back in a little downward pressure. But that's generally speaking not on a dog that's naive, meaning if I'm pulling up on the leash to get you to sit, to help with that, I've already shown you how to sit with food before right. So yes, I'm guiding the dog, and I may use more leash inputs with one dog than another to help with that process, but I'm not going from the ground up. Like my dog doesn't know how to down.
Right.
I teach him about leash yielding, and then I'm going to teach him to down with the leash like we used to, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not doing that. I show him how to down. I show him about the leash, and then I'll use the leash on the down, certainly. Mm-hmm. We do what we call layer it over it, right? And at that point, I may use leash inputs and get the reward out of it. We use it a lot when we're fading lures,
right? When
we're fading the help out and stuff. Then those leash inputs are useful, I find.
Do you think that pressure, and I guess it varies on the type of pressure, but do you think that it makes dogs within our area that we do, like sport dogs or whatever? Do you think that pressure could make them stronger? Like when you teach 100% them how to deal with it?
Yeah, and it should be not just sport dogs. It should be all dogs, right? It's just like us. It's not us. Nobody gets a stress-free life, and you wouldn't want one. And there's all kinds of science around sheltering animals from stress and humans from stress. And if you shelter them too much, they don't handle stressful experiences well, right? So part of our job as good dog trainers is kind of controlling and proctoring experiences so your dog learns to work through small appropriate doses of stress as a part of its development. Yeah. Instead of letting life throw that at them, I set up situations, and they're absolutely made stronger by that. They're made more confident. They're made more resilient. They're made more able to cope with stressful experiences because of that, right?
Yep.
And that's one, to me, I don't like to disparage various training camps, but one of the weaknesses of the force-free movement is that you can create a bunch of very fragile dogs.
Right.
Because they never learn to work through difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
And so then life throws difficulty at them inevitably, and those dogs don't handle them well.
Yeah, I mean, even in like because I've heard people, force free in protection sports, which I commend it, especially if they can get to a high level and amazing, right? I feel like it's almost like a disservice. Like I feel like the dog is not gonna see a decoy the exact same way that he would see like the toy, in a sense, if the decoy actually brought some sort of fight, or you're almost like doing a disservice to the dog and not building the dog the right way, using the dog with its, what he was intended to do and fight this decoy. I'll give you one example. I saw, I've seen somebody, they pay the dog for the outs with the ball or whatever, and everything was positive, like no correction. But at some point, like the decoy stepped on this dog, and now the rules were broken, and he was like, "I'm out of here." Like this is like these rules were like this wasn't part of the game. What happened?
No, and
I feel like that's one of the reasons why I introduce stress early.
I think it's important. Like the issue, of course, is how much and when and setting it up so the dog can resolve it. But what you touched on is something. It's a conversation that has to happen in the protection world now, because protection has turned into there's camps within the world of protection that are very into what I call super sporty dogs, biting Labradors, right? Where they're basically somebody that we're trying to train force free is going to be doing this. Basically, you're saying the decoy and a toy are basically the same thing. And if I have a dog that has a high enough threshold and has a whole bunch of drive, a bunch of prey drive, then maybe there is a dog out there who's looks at the decoy and a toy relatively equally. They're about the same thing. They don't take the work personally, and that kind of thing. And if they're the perfect candidate, maybe that dog, as long as nothing weird happens, will go and do really well, right? But in general, that's not what protection is. Like protection the dog should have a different mood there. And if your dog encounters difficulty, somebody steps on their foot, or you get a decoy that's got a whole bunch of mojo, right? The dogs that are not properly prepared are either going to bail and run away, or they're going to, if they have the right genetics, they're going to get angry and they're not going to let go. You'll lose complete control of them because you have not taught them to be under control under stress. And so now, they're under control as long as it's a stress-free thing. But as soon as you take that away, you got no outs anymore.
Do you think that a dog that did go forward and got, some aggression out of that, do you think they'll find some satisfaction in that, and it'll be harder to get that dog back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think like it's a good dog that wasn't properly prepared. Like that's a dog of good genetic character without people deliberately keeping it from having aggressive experiences, like avoiding all aversive experiences. And then the dog has one for real in a competition or something like that. And that dog doesn't bail. The dog gets angry and fights. So that's a good genetic dog.
Yeah.
But a lot of those dogs, a lot of dogs that don't out, they don't out not because they're too strong. They don't out because they're stressed. Right. This decoy brought a bunch of crap, and I've got the tiger by the tail, and I'm strong enough to stay here and fight with him, but I'm not playing by the rules anymore. Like I'm in a real fight now. Like, well, as long as it's game, then yeah, I'll listen. So the only way it's just like communicating. It's like people in companion dog training trying to control your companion dog by managing their arousal level. Like, okay, if I keep him from getting aroused, right, then I won't have any of these kind of classic arousal-based problems. But then if you miss the boat and the dog gets aroused, you got nothing. You can't communicate with them at all, right? And I feel that...
And it's the same thing with pet dogs.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And then in protection, I feel that's the same thing. Like my job is to prepare you for what might happen to you out there. And one of the things about protection is it's not always a game, right? And if it's done correctly to the spirit of the history of the discipline, then the dog should carry some aggression under the right sets of circumstances. So I have to work the dog there. Yeah. And I have to.
Yeah. I don't think people realize that, I think people this is like a seminar right now. Like this podcast is like a seminar that you guys are getting for free. Man. So, I mean, I think it's crucial. I mean, it's critical to work your dog in that state of mind to make sure that you have the control while the dog is in that state of mind so that it doesn't fail you once you get into.
And I think and I think we should leave room for the people out there that don't want to do this, right? And that there's no problem with that. And if somebody wants to raise a club dog and they want to control the sets of experiences the dog has, and they want to put the dog on decoys that they know, and they want to get some titles and they want to play, I
cool.
have no problem with it. People doing stuff with their dogs is awesome, right? But if you are going to seriously enter the world of protection disciplines, then it's a big responsibility on me to make sure that I prepare my dog appropriately. So my dog doesn't have a bad experience. And if it has a bad experience, I've given them the tools to cope with it. And
that's what I was going to say. It's a bit unfair to the dog, I think to a certain extent.
Terribly unfair. Yeah.
When you don't prepare them the right way and they face somebody that, or you end up getting rid of them because you just can't fix this issue that you have with them.
Exactly.
Man, that was good. That was like,
I couldn't imagine a dog that learns it can get into a fight, tap into its real aggression, and then it enjoys it. Do you think that's possible that a dog like that could take that aggression and that joy and take it outside of the game and possibly transfer to a human in real life?
You mean actually bite somebody?
Actually bite somebody and attacks them and just loves it. And because he knows there's no consequences.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Are you talking about one that's biting somebody they're not supposed to, or
even in a trial? I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like if he bites somebody like out of aggression because he's fighting back, he does get some satisfaction out of that, and then he's going to keep doing
the right kind of. If we're not breeding biting Labradors, which is what they're not supposed to be, right? Mm-hmm. Like. All the protection sports were originally designed to select dogs for practical, real protection work for police, military, those sorts of things, right? And so if you want a dog that can really do that work properly, then you have to keep certain kinds of genetics alive. And it is possible, and people are breeding sportier and sportier dogs. We see a lot in ring sport, these dogs that just have a huge amount of drive and then very high threshold, meaning they don't perceive threat very easily. They're like, hit me with a stick. I don't care.
Right.
Like, that guy's staring at me, whatever. Like, he's just a giant tug toy to them. And if they're drivey enough and high enough threshold, then nothing they see on the field will ever put them in stress. They're like, whatever. I've seen all that. It's no big deal, right? But it's a sport. It's cool. Those dogs can be lovely dogs. That's all totally fine. But that's not protection. Protection, right?
That's a piece of IGP that I enjoy when they do it the right way. It's like when they
the mood manipulation.
Yeah,
stuff.
man. And when I seen you guys doing it, like with your young dog, I was like, okay, Doctor, what is it, Dr. Hilliard? Yeah. Yes, yeah. I was like, dang. I was like, he brought some nice aggression. Like, bro, your young dog. Yeah. I mean, that was nice. I mean, he showed really nice aggression.
Yep. I think for me, but like, even though I train a sport where you could get away and get good points without that kind of dog. One, I think it's important for the dog's education, right? So the thing we talked about, what happens if he sees something and somebody pushes him a little harder, he has a bad experience. I want to make sure he handles it in a forward, appropriate way. Also, it tells me a lot about dogs for breeding, right? Malinois are supposed to carry some aggression.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, I love this breed. Like, the breed I met in the 1980s, for the first time, I want those dogs to still be around, right? Mm-hmm. And society's changing, and maybe like that dog doesn't have a biggest place as it used to in society, but I love that. Like, for whatever reason, Dr. Hilliard and I joke all the time because we're both like hardcore, like pacifist hippies, actually, right? Yeah. we're both like total like flower children that way. Only we like really aggressive biting dogs, right? Yeah. What is that? Like, what weird thing is that? But there's something about the Malinois and what makes the Malinois that has that element of it. So part of that work is to prepare my young dog appropriately for anything he might encounter. Yep. And it also tells me things about the dog's character. Tells me about his resilience. It tells me about how he's going to work through stress. Tells me about whether or not he could be a practical dog. Mm-hmm. So, and especially if I'm considering breeding a dog, then those are important things for me to know.
1,000%. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, even now in like, I think some departments in police work, they're trying to go even, like I've noticed like the difference now in people that are bringing certain dogs or they're getting dogs from certain places. Like some of them are like having to be built, you know, and others are like over the top, you know, and And so to me, I'm like, man, I would like to have the one that's over the top a little bit and be able to manipulate, work with that, than having to like, I mean, just like very basic stuff, like going over stuff. They, you know, they don't have the the desire.
I think there's some
for
practicalities in modern police work that's changing things as well, right? So, like you or I that has the time and the experience to handle the kind of over the top dog is then we go, yeah, I'll take that dog over the dog you have to bring up. But 99% of their work is detection these days. Like most of them aren't doing a whole bunch of apprehension unless you're in certain very specific spots. And if the dog's a good searcher and the officer can handle it without getting bitten and
they could take them to do demos.
And all that stuff. So I see a shift in the kind of dog that
you're right
most
about
departments really want anymore.
I think it depends on the city you're into.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. There's no doubt. There's going to be different from place to place, but there's kind of a little bit of a cultural shift where like maybe we don't need the monster every time.
Right.
We can have a good dog that can do most of what his job is the way I want.
Yeah. I just hope that the breeding, I mean, we've already seen things shift and how breeding, you know, has changed dogs and whatnot. Every time I talk to old timers, the dogs from back then, they were just like, like, what do you feel about that?
I think about this all the time, and I don't know that it's a different kind of dog for sure, because the way the training went was completely different. So a dog that's going to thrive the way we used to train versus a dog that's going to thrive the way we train now, those are going to be different dogs. So there are changes in the dogs. I don't know that the dogs were better. Like if you look at a lot of the real old timey dogs that they brought out like purely in aggression, the dogs don't bite nice like our dogs do now, all that kind of stuff. Like we've gotten much better at manipulating that stuff where you can have a dog that has good aggression and good gripping and good control.
Oh, you're going to piss off some people,
you didn't see any of that stuff before. The old days, you saw a lot of really aggressive dogs that bite you for sure, but they didn't look so nice when they bit.
Right.
The control was kind of sketchy. Like their obedience didn't look so good. And another thing, I was having this conversation with Ivan a while ago where we're saying like, you've seen certain dogs at certain stages in your development. Like, so there are dogs that are stuck in my mind from 30 years ago and 35 years ago and 25 years ago. And a dog that I saw it the first time, one of the very first Malinois I saw, I was super impressed with this dog.
What dog was that?
It was a dog named Mora. And Mustang. There was a French decoy that was staying out in Fontana and going out to Jean Claude Blues and was over here for a bit. And he brought the dog. It was a Dupatois dog from Belgium. Direct bibber, G-bibber son. Big, tall dog. Super dark with like white socks halfway up his front legs.
Like an Akita?
But it was a Malinois, a G-bibber son. And he bit a ton, like huge Belgian grip kind of dog, right? So when I saw that dog, I'm like, this dog at that time, I'd never seen anything like that. I'm like, what the hell is that? Thing's awesome, right? I don't know if I saw the dog now, whether I'd have the same thing. Like some dogs have huge impacts on you at the time because that's new to you, or that dog seemed really impressive. And so I have no idea. Like your aesthetic just shifts a little bit.
Did you work him?
He bit a ton.
Okay.
He didn't out. It was a bunch of stuff like that. So that's another thing that early in your career, I'm sure you've gone through the same thing. Like you want this like insane, like banging, big biting monster dog, right? Yeah. And you get that kind of dog, the dog's out of control. It's just, you're battling it for control and you think that's really cool. The longer you do it, the more you realize like, that's not cool.
Right. Or if you know that it's there, at least you kind of know how to,
I want to see
you're going to work on it early and
I want to see the same dog with the same amount of power with control.
Yeah.
Because that's a totally different
That's
thing.
what I always like. It does not impress me when I see like a dog that bites and
they're going to
goes
pry
through everything.
The dog off of people and stuff like that.
I am not impressed until I see him do obedience and
And like you see a dog that bites that way and has good aggression and brings it down there and their outs are fast and they have real stopped attacks and all that. Now we're talking. Yeah. Now you got a dog that's a good dog.
But a lot of it is training too, right?
Oh, it has to be both. It has to be both. But there are dogs like you see it with you could play around with the Dutch dogs a lot in the police work and things like that. A lot of those dogs are really good dogs if you leave them a little bit out of control.
Yeah.
Like if you asked for like French ring level control on K and PV dogs, a whole bunch of them, you'd break them. Like they wouldn't do it. Like they wouldn't support that control. but they bite like alligators if you leave them a little bit out of control. And by out of control, I don't mean out of control. They'll out, but they take 3 seconds to let go, which is a smoking out for a police dog. Like nobody cares about that, right? But they have not been selected for that same level of control. So they're powerful dogs, good character. They search like crazy, really great dogs. But putting them under that really refined control, they don't support it very well. They'll resist it and use more pressure, and then they don't want to bite, and they get all this sort of stuff. And so there is a dog that supports control, and it's not, and can still be powerful and aggressive and everything else. And that, to me, that's the holy grail of the whole thing, right? I got a dog that's got all the power. He's got the big bite. He carries good aggression. He's got good character, and he supports all this very high levels of control. And that's the one. That's what we all want.
So I know we're about to get to an hour, and I know you got to get some rest for tomorrow because you got long days. But this will be the last one from me, at least. I don't know if Ro has more questions, but
we're good.
So there's different disciplines. There's IGP. There's ring, all that good stuff. I think that it's important for people to understand. How do you change your training? Because you do ring style. How do you change your training between a ring dog that's going to have a 45-minute routine versus a IGP dog that's going to go in there for 10 minutes and
they're very different, right? So the ring dog, we were talking about it a little bit before we started this idea from the ring dog. I start assuming the dog is giving me good energy and focus and all that kind of things. I start out with longer sessions earlier, and sessions that are broken up, meaning the dog comes out, we do a little bit of stuff, then I put you in a sit or a down or even on a place bed, and you wait a couple of minutes and I get you up. I do another couple of things and I put you up. I do another couple of things. I put you up. I toggle back and forth between kind of high and low arousal activities. I let the dog check out at certain points and then put cues in where I can pull them back in.
Got it.
Right. So they can take little mental breaks. Right. I give them a cue that's
I like that.
You can check out right now. With the IGP dog, lots of short, intense sessions during the development because you want that dog kind of near maximum expression of energy the whole time. Yeah. Right. Because mostly for the obedience. Right. Because the obedience is such a it's a relatively long routine that they want a lot of speed and expression throughout. So if you do too long trainings with your young IGP dog, they tend to flatten out. Right. And then they're still correct and everything, but they lose a little bit of that fire. So kind of a different sort of mindset. I'm training this one for a marathon, and this one is a little bit more of a sprinter. Yeah.
Now let me ask you this: how picky are you with the behavior? Like, are you from the beginning looking at the final piece, and how strict are you with the criteria of the behavior?
I'm strict, right? So I have a picture of what exactly I want it to look like, right from the beginning, and I'm trying to achieve that. What I've learned in the sport that I'm most interested in training now, which is Mondioring, right? There's a lot of generalization. So I have a clear picture of what I want it to look like, but also if I feel like I need to move something forward, I will move something forward and allow some inaccuracies in it and work on fixing them later. So let's say the retrieve, right? If I were training a dog for IGP, I would want a perfect retrieve. I want the hold to be perfect. I'd break it down in little tiny pieces. I'd want the dog go out fast, grab, tight turn, straight back, good fronts, and every piece of it's going to be micromanaged, right? If I do, I can't train my Mondioring retrieve that way. If I do that, right, the dog has to retrieve all kinds of weird different objects all the time, right? And so there's a point at which I need to get to the idea that, hey, you have to pick up different items differently. I need you to potentially slow down and think because you're going to encounter a weird item and you can't just blast in there and grab it. You have to go like, oh, wait, I got to pick this up over here. And so I'll get the retrieve, and some pieces may not be completely finished. Right. My dog's retrieving something, but maybe there's still a little chewing here, or his front isn't quite perfect yet. But I sacrifice those for a period of time while I move some of the generalization pieces forward, and then I'll go back and try to clean them up as best I can. But it's more important that the dog have a understanding of the exercise than it is that it be perfectly precise. And so there's a point at which I have a mental picture, but I deliberately will say, okay, I'm going to take that right now, because I think it's more important that I move the thing forward.
I never thought about it like
but
that.
But that's just sort of like an experience thing.
Yeah,
You get
that was
spot
good.
where you're
Yeah,
just
I mean,
I feel this, and they're like, we should move through this now, and we can come back and try to fix this later.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to waiting for everything to be perfect before you move to the next step, you can
Right.
get stuck sometimes.
Yeah, that was good. That was a nice little gold nugget for you guys out there. You got any questions, Ro?
Yeah, just I'm a pit bull person.
I love pit bulls. They're wonderful creatures.
Yeah, so I just this is a question that
Soft
we've asked
spot.
many people, but how would you compare? Because you did compete in IGP with a pit bull.
Yep.
You said Juliet. Right?
Yep.
How would you compare the pit bull to the Malinois when it comes to specifically sport?
The Malinois better.
Yeah, they're like I loved pit bulls, and when I got into pit bulls, I got into them because I was looking for. I'm like, all right, I'm done with German Shepherds. Like, I'm looking for the next dog, and I thought, well, pit bulls should be a good working dog. Everything that they've been bred for should make them tough and durable and athletic and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I got into it. I kind of researched game bred lines, all kinds of junk like that, and I had a bunch of pit bulls over the period of time. I realized really quickly it's hard to find pit bulls that are good for work, because that's not what they've been selected for. Nope. They've been selected for fighting, and they're really good at that. And you would think, a fighting dog's going to be tough. Lots of the fighting dogs aren't tough at all. Like, they're tough with another dog, but they're afraid of loud noises. And what I found, the biggest thing that I found with lots of pit bulls, and it's changing now because people have been breeding pit bulls for longer and longer for work, is they had good prey drive. It was easy to get them to bite stuff, and that they get really mopey under pressure.
Yeah.
There's what I call suppressive stressors. Yep. Like a lot of Malinois, you can get suppressive stressors with Malinois too that are kind of get mopey, but a lot of Malinois get kind of energized under stress. What I call active stress.
Yeah.
You put a little pressure on them and they go, oh, and they get agitated. They want to do something with that energy.
They do that.
And pit bulls go like, oh.
Yep.
Yeah.
They walk like, oh man, why are you mad at me, kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so I found
You just described it perfectly.
I found it really hard to find pit bulls that had the temperament to do good work, right? And they exist out there, but there hasn't been a really concentrated effort to breed them consistently.
Yeah.
Right? And for a long time, they're bred to have zero human aggression, right? That's changed in recent years as well. But all the fighting dog guys, they didn't want the dog to bite a person at all.
Right.
You had to stick your hands in their mouth while they're fighting and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So I found that lots of the pit bulls had beautiful biting kind of in prey, but you also couldn't do aggression work with them well. Yeah. There are different dogs out there now, but yeah. So I love them. Like they're sweet. They make great pets. They're like lounge in your bed with you for hours. They're wonderful that way. But finding good working ones is challenging.
It's hard.
Yeah, and it's tough with dogs like that, huh? Where they give you just enough where you're like, I could probably do something with them, and then it's like you correct them, and it's like, oh,
It's
man.
a very thin line to walk.
Yeah, it is. It is.
His dog, like we went to a trial, and first we were like, put some pressure on her, and she didn't want to out. So I was like, all right, we got to work her, like make sure she has clean outs. Then all of a sudden, like we weren't smart enough, and she was, so now she's counting like 12 seconds. I'm gonna go back, and in trial, sure enough, and she thought she did it right, She's just like she's biting, and all of a sudden pops off, comes back to his heel, and I'm just like
She was happy.
she was good.
I did a good job.
And I'm just like, man, like it's one. And then like if you go too hard with them, like as far as like protection goes, they don't want to out. Like his dog doesn't want to out. But then if you go too hard with the correction to out, now she doesn't want it's just tough, man.
They're adorable. Like they're such comfort hounds. Like the last pit bull I really was training with, like you trying to get her to do a down out of motion on wet grass, she'd be like, she'd run through a rock wall and bash her head in, but like, oh, that's cold on my stomach, right?
Yeah.
Like we're doing distracted downstays, and you could throw balls and hop around, no problem. I did a downstay, put her here, and I put a dog bed like 3 feet away from her.
She was like, nah, I'm going to go to the dog
She's
bed.
like, look at me. She'd slide over an inch and then look like, what? I'd look at her. She's like, I'm not doing anything. You'd look away for a sec. She'd scoot over an inch. I'm like, and I knew she was doing it. I was like, let's see how long it takes her. Like a couple minutes and she's on the dog bed. So I never got up.
Yeah.
Definitely the pit
That's
bull.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh man. Anything else, bro? You good?
Yeah.
Michael, man, we appreciate you hanging out with us, talking
my
dogs.
Pleasure, guys. My pleasure.
We're looking forward to this weekend. I know you have an online platform now where you're sharing a bunch of content. Where can people?
So you can go to my website, michaelellisschool.com, and we just started a subscription service in June of this last year, right?
Nice.
And so a year and a half ago, I shut down our kind of long-term program. So for 15 years, I ran what we call the immersion program twice a year, which was like a 5-month students come and stay for 5 months and dog training.
That's a long time.
Dog training school. And so I'll be 60 coming up. And so I'm like, okay, time to slow down a little bit. So I stopped doing a lot of the long in-person program. I still do like some short workshops in person. And I've moved kind of everything into this online membership service. That's where all my new contact's going. And I've taken recorded versions of a bunch of the classes, our live classes, and they're in there. Like whole classes are in there. Like, so my obedience intensive class are in there. My personal video training journals in there.
Awesome.
My young dog, all of his training sessions are in there, uncut, unedited, voiced over. A bunch of webinars. There's a lot of stuff. So any new content that I'm doing now is just getting dumped in there. So part of the monthly fee, you have access to that as long as you're a member. So that's where I'm kind of putting my energy these days.
Cool, man. Awesome. And then, his Instagram, Michael Ellis School, right?
Yep.
I mean, you guys already know. What am I saying? Come on, bro.
Fine.
Anyway, come on. Anyways, but if you actually, there are some people like there's a lot of new trainers that are have big followings. Like Shane has a huge following. He's gone to your place.
Yeah.
He's gonna be here this weekend.
Guy, yeah.
But there's a lot of people that are
they're blowing up on the internet,
and they're bringing other people that have no clue about dog sport and everything. So. I know. I have a lot of followers that come from Shane and Celine and all them. Well, this is the guy that basically I got most of like what I do from. So make sure you guys go check him out. And Michael, thanks again, man.
My pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Let's have a great seminar this weekend. It's gonna be great.
Let's do it.
All right.
Let's get it. This that go and get it. With no hesitation. This that never quit. Start that elevation. This that process.